Hello and welcome to another episode of Crossing the Line, Tales from the Entertainment Industry. And I'm your host, Oliver Rednall.
And I'm Charlie Cullicutt.
Today's guest is one of Britain's most influential film directors. His films include Naked, Secrets and Lies and Vera Drake. In 2015, he was awarded the BAFTA Fellowship and nominated for 7 Academy Awards, among many, many others.
We are very lucky to be talking to Mike Leigh. And in this episode, we discuss challenging the status quo, standing by your artistic vision, and the process of developing and bringing a story to life. Please make sure to like, subscribe and share. But for now, sit back and enjoy this episode with one of Britain's most esteemed directors.
Mike, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
It's nice to be here.
Thank you. I wanted to jump straight in with something Charlie and I were discussing yesterday. Throughout your career, you have maintained artistic control on all of your projects. We see more and more interference from studios, producers with directors these days. Do you think something like that, like the artistic control on your side, will be less and less for newer filmmakers?
Oh, yes. It's definitely got worse and worse. I mean, I know a lot of young filmmakers. I mean, apart from anything else, the problem begins the minute anyone tries to pitch anything. I mean, there are so many boxes to tick and so many people with their hands or fingers all over it who start from the premise of preconceptions about what sort of commodity they want and so on and so forth, that it's becoming very inhibiting. And we're talking about, at the moment, we're talking about television and films, not theatre. I mean, theatre is as free as ever it was, if not more so. To link up my own experience with the question you're asking, I've been fantastically lucky from the word go by being in the right place at the right time, it probably to some fluky degree. Because first of all, I mean, we'll talk if you want to about my early starting, how I got going, but certainly at a very early stage, when I'd formulated the notion without actually having done it, that you could create theatre or indeed films by everyone collaborating and rather than writing a separate script, etc., etc. I happened by a series of flukes to be offered a job at the then brand new Midlands Arts Centre in Birmingham, in Cannon Hill Park, where there was supposed to be a theatre company doing plays mostly for young people. And I would be the assistant director. And when I arrived, there was no theatre company. In fact, it was even long after I'd left that it started. They just hadn't got it together. But there was a brand new state-of-the-art studio theatre. And so I was given carte blanche to work with what they called an arts club, which was local kids between 16 and 25, so young grown-ups, to do whatever I wanted. And so I was able to start creating these misnamed improvised plays, i.e. plays built from improvisation, though not actual improvisations in front of the audience. So that was fluke number one. So because I was able to do that, I then was able to develop that, and I did it in various places, fringe theatres, in drama schools, particularly East 15, and also at the RSC, where I was assistant director for a while. Then did one which we turned into my first movie, Bleak Moments, which had the good fortune to be seen by Tony Garnett, the producer whom Phil Jackson talked about, who invited me to the BBC to make a film in my own way. And I then spent 12 years or so making films for the BBC. Now, the point about that in the context of your question is that at that time, the BBC was incredibly liberal and incredibly creative. So I'd go in there, and once I could get a gig, I mean, some producers would say, well, if I don't know what it is, I can't give you a film without, but those that were inspired enough to give me a slot, you'd go in and they'd say, these are the dates, that's the budget, go away and make a film. So I did that for a long stretch. And by the time, and couldn't make a feature film throughout that time because you couldn't. The British indigenous serious feature films were hardly existed. But then Channel 4 started, and their remit was to fund independent productions. And that's when the revival of the British cinema started. And I, having established that I could do that, and by the way, I'd done a whole bunch of stage plays, some of which were very successful, including Abigail's Party and Goose Pimples, which ran in the West End for 6 months. I established that I could do that. From there on in, I've always been able to say, this is what I do. There isn't a script. We can't tell you what it's about. We can't tell you what the casting is. Leave us to it. Now, it's what is very straightforward is this. When I, with my producers, have pitched a project on that basis, only one of two things happen. They either say, great, here's the money, go away and make a film, or they tell us to fuck off. And it won't surprise you to know that the majority of times the latter has happened.
Yeah, us too, so don't worry. We know.
Yeah. But I mean, but the important thing is this. My late producer who died, Simon Channing Williams, who produced all of my films up to a certain point, about 10 years ago, he would go off and meet potential backers, often Americans, and he'd come back and he'd say, you know what? They don't mind that there's no script. They don't care that they don't know what it's about. And they'll give you anything you want, budget-wise, but they will insist on a name. And by that, they meant an American movie star. And I used to say regularly, walk away. And he'd say, yeah, but and I'd say, no, let's walk away. It's not worth. So the bottom line answer to what you're talking about is you have to not compromise. Now, having said that, and going back to young filmmakers, particularly, and I say I know quite a lot of them. I mean, the amount of rubbish that they've had to put up with. A small gang that have been really successful in making very good low-budget films. They're a gang, they're a team. And they went to a meeting with a well-known funding organization, and the director was asked the question, why isn't your cinematographer a woman? The answer was, he said, because he's a man, basically. Similarly, people are being bullied about the ethnic diversity. Sure. Well, it's great. No, there should be ethnic diversity, but it's got to be organic. It's got to be, you can't, I mean, I could refuse to talk to you two because you're not black. You're two white guys, and why should I talk to you? You're just white guys. I mean, it's nonsense, And the box ticking is getting in the way. But also, another young woman filmmaker I know from the West Country who's made some very successful films. It's got a very good project. Was met by the producer of an important funding body that we won't name, and who said to this director, who, by the way, makes films about real people in real life stuff, very, very good. She said, well, could this be, is there a way in which this could be a crime? You should know. She wanted it to be a whole bunch of, and people talk in terms of genre, people say, what genre is it? It's very, very destructive, and it's very naive, and it's very Philistine, and it's very counterproductive, and it's very reductionist, and it's very sick. So all of these things get in the way, and quite apart from the fact that when the productions do get on the go, they get interfered with all the time. You see, this was all invented by Louis B. Mayer in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. This is Hollywood behavior. And the infection of Hollywood behavior has got into the funding of low budget projects and things, which is very, very dangerous. Of course, Hollywood behavior still happens in Hollywood, except for those directors who have been strong enough to, strike out and be independent. I mean, a well-known producer, and you will know who I mean, who's now in prison, is famous for screwing up the endings of things and interfering with things and buggering about the casting. People say to me sometimes, do you ever watch your own films? And my answer is yes, but sometimes, and I don't have a problem with it at all. I actually like my films, and I like them because I didn't say I sit watching them all the time like Gloria Swanson in Sunset.
You've got your own channel just on a loop all day.
Absolutely, yeah. But no, it's because I have the privilege of everything that's in my films is what I wanted to be there in every detail. And I know lots of directors who say, regarding this, that, or the other film they've made, they say, I can't watch it. I never watch it. I can't. And the reason mostly that they can't watch it is because it isn't the film they wanted to make, because the casting was not who they wanted, or the script went through all kinds of convolutions before it ever got on the screen and even afterwards. And then it was interfered with the editing, and it was subjected to these awful test screenings with audiences, and they buggered up the ending, and that happens all the time. So all those things are a disease. As to the question, is it getting better or is it getting worse? In that sense, it's getting worse. It's more difficult. And indeed, I've had quite a bit of trouble very recently, in getting backing for a film where I was saying, don't know what it's about, can't tell you anything about it, etc. It's got tougher, but there you go.
And also, when you bring a big American star, or any star really, you do run the risk of them interfering with it as well.
Well, that's not in question. I mean, that's why I wouldn't even. That's not. We don't even get to that question. No, I mean that's true. I mean, no doubt you'll want to talk about how I do what I do when I do it, but of course, but one of the first principles of my work certainly is that the actor contributes as an actor, and only knows about what his or her character knows, and it's a very organic process. But the actors are not in a committee of deciding what the film is. So the actors don't have an overview of the film, and they certainly are not in any position to dictate anything about the film at all. In fact, they embrace the creative freedom of doing it, being an actor and contributing very fully as an actor, but not as a quasi-producer.
Because I remember...
No, it will be a complete nightmare to have them,
Yeah, we read in another interview you said about how actors sometimes turn up and they haven't had time to prepare. I mean, I know someone at the moment who's waiting on a job and it could start on next Monday, and these things are such a short turnaround, and the project suffers due to that.
Well, you know what? It's you say the project.
Well, it could potentially.
No, I mean, absolutely. The project suffers, just as if you showed up at the airport and you were filed into an aeroplane that actually bizarrely had no wings, that would suffer as well. And it's as fundamental as that. It really is. I mean, you show up particularly on a movie. I mean, we know that there is seldom preparation for a film, and even when there is, it's a kind of lip service preparation. It's people sitting around a table for a day, or something, or just talking about it or something. But you show up. You're supposed to be, you and the actress of those playing characters have been married for half a century, you've only just met, or there's some other complex relationship and you've only just met. You're supposed to live in this place and you have no relationship with it. You're wearing frocks that you haven't had any input into what they are, and you haven't in any way had a chance to wear them in, or get used to them. Apart from, my partner Marion has just done a thing where they kept sending new rewrites, which incidentally dissipated the piece stage by stage. Rewrites, including in the middle of the night when she was going to get up, she picked up at 6 o'clock in the morning, and this is for a television series of, no great profundity. So all of these things contribute to actor insecurity. And then, of course, there are endless takes because it's all over the place and the actors can't get it together, and who could blame them, and so on and so forth. And so obviously what I'm concerned with doing, what we do, is to build something that is absolutely rock solid in its foundations, and the actors are secure, and it's integrated performance, been rehearsed, it's integrated with where you are, the location, it's integrated, the frocks are part of everything, and it's completely organic. And incidentally, we often go for not many takes, and if we do, it's because Lufthansa flew over or something, or because I want to have nuances of behaviour and to work within the cutting room.
Do you still get approached to do, we have this ready-made film to direct, would you like to direct it? Do you get that still?
No.
You don't at all. They know that you're...
It hasn't happened for it's seldom ever happened, because I established long ago that's not what I'm not in the business of doing. And also, I think my agent will get them,
okay.
But I never know about them because, it's not an issue. The last play I directed in the 60s, I carried on doing the productions here and there for my experience, really. And then in 1970, the late black actor Earl Cameron, who died recently at the age of 102 or something, who was from Bermuda, invited me to go and direct a production there. They were going to do Othello, but it had fallen through because there are only 2 black characters in it, and all the local black amateur actors had caused a fuss. So they sent him back to London to find another director. So he found a young and malleable director called Mike Leigh, and we wound up doing The Life of Galileo by Bertolt Brecht, which was a complete and total and utter disaster because we were all way out of our depth, or at least a lot of people were. And so I decided I would only do my own stuff. And since then, I directed a short film that Jim Broadbent wrote, which plays the central character, called A Sense of History. And I directed The Pirates of Penzance for the English National Opera about 5 or 6 years ago. And those are the only 2 things with scripts I have done, with somebody else's scripts, I've done since.
You talked earlier about the actors you work with and the process you go with them. You have your own contingent of actors, I think it's fair to say.
No, I don't. I think it's a myth, actually.
Okay.
I think it's a myth. Of course, there is a contingent of people who I've worked with lots of times. The record holder is Leslie Manville.
9 films, hasn't she done? 9?
What?
She's done 9 films, hasn't she, I think?
10. Well, 10 things, including plays.
Yeah.
But no, I resist the idea because it's really not realistic that it's a kind of permanent ensemble of some kind, because it isn't. And I've never done anything which didn't contain a substantial proportion of new people I hadn't worked with before. But obviously, if it works with folk, you come back to them. It's as simple as that.
Well, so I was going to ask, do you, when you are thinking up your new idea, do you go, right, this would be great for Leslie or Timothy or Ruth, Jean, and...
Yeah, of course. That's obvious. And it's a natural thing to do. They're there, and if there are if it makes sense, and they're around and available. But that's very straightforward.
So my question was going to be, you mentioned earlier that, some producers said we would be involved, but a star has to be attached, and you said no straight off the bat. Is there anybody out there who you would have been interested to have potentially worked with who you haven't had the chance to?
There are. Well, are there any actors that? Yeah, there are. I mean, there are several people that are, for one fluky reason or another, are always not available when I check them out. But I think your question is, are there any stars that I would?
No, I'm genuinely
Oh
interested.
yeah, no, of course there are, but it's usually just that, really.
Sure.
Not everybody is always available, and some very good people. There's one actor who I've worked with once, a very well-known actor, brilliant, David Bradley, who was in
Another Year.
Another Year, and he was fantastic. But he never stops.
No, he's always working, isn't he? Everything I turn on the TV.
It's as straightforward as that, and he knows that, and I know that. But that's just an ordinary fact of the business.
You say there's a bit of a myth that you have this contingent of actors. What other kind of misconceptions do you think people have of you or your films that you see in the press, or it's more of a headline rather than?
Well, we haven't got long enough for me to list all of them. The main one, of course, is that it's all improvised on camera, which couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, they're making it up as they go along. And of course, the other one, which I've kind of already alluded to, is that, the actors come in and form a kind of committee, and we all sit around and say what it should be about and all that stuff. I mean, that's just rubbish, basically. But the main one is that it's all, everybody is ad-libbing away on camera. Well, of course, there are, first of all, the use of use of improvisation within a film is a widely practiced thing in all sorts of movies, including mine, on occasions. I mean, if I've got two characters and they're going to walk down the street in a contemporary film, going to walk down the street amongst real people with real things going on, and we just want them chatting, then we don't always construct the dialogue for that, because there are some moments that the ambience, it lends itself to it. And I've always got actors who, by the time we get to shooting, in any case, can improvise in character very completely and thoroughly and reliably. But that's not what it's about, for example. It's about rehearsal and distillation and arriving at very, very good scripts, which are organically integrated with everything else. And also, I mean, like many a director, I will on occasions not cut at the end of the structured scene and just let it roll, the camera roll a bit. And there are odd moments in my films where a little extra things have happened because I didn't cut. But those are so marginal and so unusual that they don't really rank as the main thing.
Do you think, talking about actors for a second, do you think younger actors are getting into the business? I mean, it's always happened, of course, because people chase the fame and fortune and all the rest of it. But do you think more and more are becoming, due to the look at me kind of generation that we're in, due to social media and, 1,000 channels and all the rest of it? Do you think they're attracted to the business more because of that, rather than the art itself? I remember reading a quote here, which we wrote down, which I found hilarious, is, there are intelligent actors out there, and there are actors who are very good, but they are thick, and those ones are not in my films. You said,
no, I didn't say that.
No, well, I did think this, didn't I? Say.
No, you've got that slightly wrong. I've said that not all actors are. There are actors who are very good, but. So anyway, we won't.
Yeah. I did suspect that it might be.
But it's slightly. That's not really relevant to the question you're asking. You're asking me, are young actors attracted to the wrong things, etc.? Well, some are, but it will be absolutely outrageous to suggest that there aren't, because there are. Huge numbers of very, very committed, very serious people who take acting seriously, depicting the world seriously, and are not attracted merely by the glitz and glamour and the social media aspect of it all. There are, of course there are, but then there always have been. And I mean, in a way, there are people who want to be in show business. But, we're talking about actors. And I mean, the problem, as you both know, the real problem for actors is that there are just too many actors. And that's the real problem. And going back to that, quoting me or misquoting me, what I was saying is that there are lots of fantastically intelligent actors out there and brilliant. And I'm interested in people who I would classify as character actors who don't just play themselves. That there's a huge number of talented people. And indeed, there are very, very good drama schools. But there are too many drama schools. And I wouldn't suggest closing any of them down. But they turn out, I think it's it used to be 300, I think it's more, new actors a year. And, in some ways, there's some work has proliferated, but still there isn't enough to go around,
Yeah, and obviously universities as well all have drama courses and various.
That's also true.
Yeah. So there's a hell of a lot more than there used to be.
You mentioned a second ago that you are interested in actors who you'd classify as character actors, and I made a comment to Ollie last night that I had watched Timothy Spall in particular play such a range of characters, from his rather quite gruff, almost dirty Mr. Turner to a quite, very vulnerable, very shy character in All or Nothing, for instance. And I wanted to just ask you, when it comes to creating those characters, do you immediately go, he's this kind of character, or does someone like Timothy bring that forward and then you shape it from there? How does that work?
Neither of those things.
Neither of those things.
What happened? No, not as such. What happens is, first of all, when I invite an actor to take part in a play or a film that I'm doing, apart from the 3 historical films I've made, where we knew in Topsy Turvy, Mr. Turner and Peterloo, we knew we were making a film about Gilbert and Sullivan, about J.M.W. Turner, about the Peterloo Massacre. And so a lot of actors knew that's what we're doing this. But apart from those films, for all the other films, the journey of making the film has been a journey of exploration through which we discover what the film is. Now, of course, I start with all sorts of ideas and notions and feelings and all the rest of it, but still, it's, I work, a way to understand what I do, I think, is to see it in terms of how painters work, how novelists work, how dramatists, poets, sculptors, musicians work. That is to say, you make a mark on the canvas and react to it. It tells you where to go next. How many novelists have you heard saying that they didn't know where it was going to go and the character dictated, all those things. And that's really what I do. So I will say to an actor, please be in this project. I can't tell you anything about it because we will discover what it is on the journey of making it. I can't tell you anything about the character because there is no character, because you and I are going to collaborate to create a character. And also, I will say, you will never know anything about the whole project except what your character knows. And that discipline is maintained throughout the entire long rehearsal period and through the shoot. It's slightly different when you get to a stage play, because once we fix the play, obviously people get a sense of what it is they're taking part in. But with films, very often, invariably, in fact, each actor only discovers what the film that he or she has taken part in is when we have a private screening for them and they come and see the finished film. And then they go, oh, blimey, I didn't realise it. Now, the important thing about that, obviously, is that it means that we can investigate situations on all kinds of levels where you really, you'll see your character as the center of his or her universe. You have no overview. You know nothing about the other characters that you wouldn't know. And it's completely truthful and therefore organic. So to start with, to answer your question, I work individually with each actor. And I will say to the actor, make a list of real people you know. sometimes I give a particular guidance of what sort of person, but not often, not depends. But what is the only stipulation I always make is same sex, and possibly age range, same age range or something. I will then do lots of sessions, one-on-one with the actor, nobody else there, no stage managers, no ADs, nothing, just one-on-one. It takes a long time. And the actor will talk about this person and that person. The record holder for the length of people on the list is Sally Hawkins on Happy Go Lucky, who clocked up 212. Before that, the record holder was David Thewlis, who was 111 or something on
Naked.
The actor will talk about this person and that person. They might talk about this person in depth, and then they might say, well, actually, there's a guy I don't even know who he was, name was, but I just talk about him very briefly. I remember a little bit about it. And I will gradually say, let's get rid of him, let's get rid of her, let's have a short list. My responsibility as dramatist, a storyteller, is to know that I'm working with this actor, and I've got this on the go, and that actor, and I'm thinking about the possibilities. And gradually, we whittle it down to usually 3 people, and then we distill them into a character. So therefore, to answer your question, neither of the things that you're suggesting happens. Sure. I don't say, I think we want to do somebody like this. And certainly, nobody, not even Mr. Spall, shows up and says, here's my character, or I suggest this, because if they did, they'd be out the door.
Yeah. Is there any one of your particular films that in your mind started out somewhere but is completely far away from where it then ended up? Or did all of them do that?
I think it's a question I can't answer specifically, but it's a good question. In the premise of the question is correct, because in a way they all do. Because they don't all wind up in a completely different place, but it is in the nature of the creative process and of what we do. But certainly, I haven't ever made a film that in a hypothetical world I could have described in detail before, because surprises happen, there are, if you take Vera Drake, for example, Vera Drake is presents complicated answers to what we're talking about now, because in the first place, I knew absolutely that I wanted to make a film about a backstreet abortionist set at a time before the 1967 Abortion Act. And I decided, for various reasons, that we should set it around about 1950. It's set in 1950. In the first place, what I didn't do, what I was obliged for obvious moral reasons to break my own rule, I didn't not tell Imelda Staunton she was going to be playing an abortionist, because you can't do that. You have to know that she'd be cool with playing an abortionist, and she was. So I shared that with her. And I knew not only that it was going to be about that, but I also did a lot of research, and I therefore knew that there were certain things that would have to happen in the film, and I predetermined those and cast it accordingly. You knew that they would have a woman with a family. You knew there would be a whole bunch of women with unwanted pregnancies. You knew that you'd need doctors and nurses and so on. You knew that you'd need police, and you knew you'd need lawyers, and you knew you need a judge. All of those things were non-negotiable facts. But within the exploration, there was all the stuff about people not knowing what they wouldn't know. They still obtained to a very considerable level, to the extent that the for example, the actors in the family, playing the family, did not know that Imelda was playing a woman who was an abortionist, because Vera Drake wouldn't have told them and didn't tell them. And therefore they didn't know. Everyone knew there was a whole lot of other people doing something, but nobody knew it, because you don't come to the rehearsal place unless you're called. So they didn't know that there'd been a whole bunch of women with unwanted pregnancy that she dealt with. She didn't know that the last one had gone wrong, or that we'd been doing stuff involving doctors and nurses. Nobody knew there were cops, etc., etc. So when we reached the stage after months of building up to it, where it was time to investigate what happened when the cops came around to arrest her, at the rehearsal stage, this is 2.5 months before we shot the film, there was an 11-hour improvisation. Everybody in character, in costume. We rehearsed the whole thing in a hospital, the hospital that's now been refurbished as a health centre, next to the swimming pool on the way to Alexandra Palace, at Crouch End. One end of the hospital was a big ward, which we turned into a police station. There was a small flat at the other end of the hospital, which for ages, months, had been the Drake family home, a little flat with doctors and nurses had used on the night shifts. And there they all were, and they were all in character, in costume, with real food and everything else. And improvisations in this convention happen in real time. In other words, an hour is an hour, and 11 hours was 11 hours. And
so it's not sped up.
And to stay in character, the rule is you can't come out of character unless there's a real crisis reason to do so. And, it was dynamite, So when the cops came around, I mean, it was shocking because they didn't know, she didn't. And the cops thought they were going to be confronted by an aggressive woman who would give them a hard time, and so on and so on. All of which, of course, was there to draw on when 2.5 months later we were on location in Stepney Green in the East End, in a flat, in the location flat. We were able to draw on that and distill it down into a very tightly structured and very successful, I think, scene.
I can only imagine from watching that scene in the film, that moment where the police then walked in was absolutely electric to just be in the room with and watch as this.
Absolutely.
Because she doesn't react in this aggressive way at all. She is compliant to the letter.
Well, what you see, I mean, what Imelda, of course, gives the most extraordinary performance. And, we hold the camera on her, and what you see is a woman knowing she's experiencing what she's always dreaded and somehow known she was going to experience, and her world is falling apart, and they're in the middle of celebrating the fact that the daughter's got engaged to the guy next door, and the brothers and sister have come around to say that they're having a baby, and they're all very happy. And, no, she doesn't react aggressively or any of that. She simply, but it's all going on. And boy, you can read it, But, again, just to go back to it goes without saying that you couldn't there's no way with a script or whatever, there's no way you could arrive at any of the quality of that I'm aware of without having gone through the long and painstaking and grueling journey that we did, that one does in this context.
With those really high charged scenes, do you try and keep the crew to a minimum? Obviously, you're there, the DOP is there. Do you try and keep the numbers down?
You can't. Keeping the crew to a minimum doesn't mean anything. No, okay. I mean, everyone's got a job to do, and they have to have someone doing it. I mean, this is not what you're asking me, but I mean, in a way, what you're asking me is about intimacy and
yes, that's right.
on the set. Well, yeah. I mean, obviously, you haven't got crowds of anyone that doesn't need to be there. But when we're shooting in rooms or whatever, I mean, when we shot naked, I mean, we went out of our way to be sure that traditionally, there were some quite brutal sex scenes in naked. I mean, traditionally, it would have been a room full of men. But we had a woman boom swinger, and the designer was a woman, and she was there, and obviously the script supervisor was a woman, and there was the focus puller was a woman, But in terms of the number, I mean, actually, when we shot the scene we're talking about in Vera Drake, in a very small flat, there were 11 characters, a 35mm camera with its team, sound guys, props guy. I mean, it was very difficult in a narrow corridor. It's crazy, really. But you can't, if you're going to shoot to motion picture standards, you've got to have the skills there doing it.
As technology has advanced and we now have more and more films are being shot on digital, is that something that you've embraced? Is that something you work closely with your DOP, or is it something you choose? Do you prefer to shoot on film or more digital now?
Well, history looks after these things. I mean, I've worked with the same DOP, Dick Pope, since Life is Sweet in 1990. He shot everything I've done since. And we, of course, traditionally, we were staunch, inflexible 20th century celluloid men. And we shot everything on film up to and including another year. But then it became more difficult. The fact is that some very smart people over a very long time have been developing this extraordinary new technology. And so we shot Mr. Turner and Peter Lew on a digital camera, and it's amazing stuff. I mean, what you can do with it is extraordinary. I mean, you could do things with it that I don't do, and he and I have no taste for. I mean, you can, as you know, have a continuous take that goes on for 90 minutes. Well, I think in film terms. I think in, if you like, to put it in this way, I think as he does in celluloid terms, i.e., a length of a roll of film is only up to 10 minutes long, maximum. So I think in terms of shots, and so does he. And so we use the digital technology, but we have those disciplines. But at the same time, there are also things you can do, particularly in post-production. I mean, you look at Peter Lew. When you look at the actual massacre, I presume you've seen it. We did not have that number of people there.
No, sure.
It's done brilliantly with crowd work. But nor did we shoot in 1819 Manchester. But if you look at that, everywhere you look, there are buildings. Well, we shot it at Tilbury Fort, which is just nothing there but the sky around the actual fort itself. And the post-production, the special effects guys made a virtual model working from plans and drawings of buildings in Manchester. They built a virtual model of Manchester in 1819. So in any direction you looked, they could put in the right background and so on and so forth. Now, all of there are things, and there are all sorts of things. I mean, in Happy Go Lucky, in the driving lesson scenes, I was absolutely, I was very strict that the actors, that we did not shoot it on a low loader towing the car around. The actors were actually driving the car. It was important for the performances and for the integrity of the thing. And so Dick Pope was able to put tiny so-called lipstick cameras, which are digital cameras, dotted around in the car to get shots, even though we were shooting the film on film. So we had a 35mm camera behind them and little cameras around. And we were able to, with the digital technology, able to integrate that footage into the celluloid film footage in a way that you couldn't have done with in the old days, where it was all digital technology, all celluloid technology. So it's very exciting and to be embraced. Of course, we still talk about, well, maybe we should shoot something on film, but that's partly nostalgia.
Sure.
I wanted to ask quickly, you mentioned that obviously Peterloo wasn't shot in Manchester. Now, I don't want to assume on your behalf, but you are from Salford, and you seem quite proud that you grew up in Salford with...
Well, I'm certainly not ashamed.
No, of course not. I'm from Chester myself. I'm
Chester?
Yeah.
Doesn't count.
It doesn't count. Okay, I'll take your word for
Stop it, Charlie. Leave now.
But what I was going to say is, most of your films are based down in London. And I wondered, is there a reason for that, or have you ever thought about...
Yes, there is a reason. There is a reason for that. The reason is that it's easier and cheaper to make a film in London.
Okay. That was a very succinct answer.
I mean, it really is. I mean, you know, I mean, the plan was to make the film that became Vera Drake up north. I didn't think twice about it because it's resonated. I thought, well, that's the world I grew up in. Out of the question. I mean, it's very, very... it's expensive, basically. And we are in London and London-based, and, you know, the crews are London-based, and generally speaking. But you see, here's the thing. Most of the films I've made are set in London. They vary as to how specific what goes on is particularly related to the fact they're in London, but they all, nevertheless, the detail leaves you in no doubt that we're talking about London, and there are London nuances and things. And some people, and it's very flattering, have called me, you know, the London cinematic poet and all that kind of stuff. The London films of Mike Leigh is, and it's quite a, you know, I like that in a way. But the real point, as far as I'm concerned, is that the milieu may be London, but what the films are about, I would hope, is universal. They're not. I don't think I've made a film that is so specifically and exclusively London-esque that it's only about being in London. They're just not about that. They're about
the stories
people.
of the people.
Yeah, people and how we live and how we are. And they not only are they universal, but they travel. I mean, they travel internationally, and they travel in, you know, for years in the period that I referred to much earlier, when you couldn't make an indigenous British film. I did go and talk to various backers, and one American, very sympathetic American producer in London, who was living in London, said, you know, he said, you make great films, but they'll never work in America, never work in the States. Well, I've had 7 Oscar nominations. You know, I mean, you know, they've done topsy-turvy. Ran for 6 months in the Paris cinema in Central Park South in New York. You know, I mean, you know. So the point is, to go back to the question, that's why we have, and I suspect will continue to mostly work in London. The question as to why we didn't shoot Peterloo in Manchester, it would have been great to shoot in Manchester. And indeed, a lot of the actors who played all those parts were northern based, and we had to keep coming down to London for the rehearsals and things. And then, of course, I mean, the question was not whether we shoot it in Manchester, but where the hell anywhere we could find to shoot, to have control for a substantial length of time over a location that could in any way pass for St. Peter's Fields in Manchester in 1819. I mean, it was very, very difficult. And bits of the film were shot in Lincoln, some of it was shot in Chester, you know, some of it was shot in Gainsborough, random places, if you like, because, you know, you had to just piece together a jigsaw puzzle of not only visually feasible locations, but also practically and available locations and places you can control. I mean, having a control over, you can see from looking at that massacre sequence, you'd have to have 100% control over wherever you were. You couldn't have them, you know, stop because it was market day or, you know, half closing or school coming out or whatever.
Just jumping back to what you said earlier about how you think in shots, you and your DOP. especially in today's with Netflix and streaming services, they get a lot of episodes and a lot of things happen. There's a lot of quick cuts, especially obviously in action films. That works really, really well. But films cut all the time now, and it's not that often you see long takes. And I don't talk about the continuous shot one that's done as a trick. I'm talking about, for example, Secrets and Lies, when they're in the cafe sequence. It's a long take. It's just letting it play out. Is that like almost pandering to a generation that doesn't have the attention span that we once did?
Well, I mean, that may be true to some extent. I actually wouldn't like to say. I don't know. It may be true that there are certain stylistic things that come out of what you can do with technology. But I don't really think one should generalize about these things, because there are plenty of films kicking around that have got are disciplined in the use of the classical use of editing, and you could find lots of very recent contemporary films which hold on things for lengths of time if they need to, and so on. I'm not really disposed to generalize about
Sure.
that.
Okay. Yeah. Are there any films that you really, really like, or you've been surprised that you like in recent times, that people would be surprised that, Mike Leigh actually is really into this style of film or this?
Probably quite a lot. Yeah. I mean, I am a film watcher.
Yeah.
But now you're confronting me with one of the questions that always induce instant amnesia.
All the answers suddenly go.
Yeah. When you did Bleak Moments, how long was the rehearsal? Were all the rehearsal periods the same? Period of time,
well, these days, they tend to be about 6 months.
Okay.
It varies a bit. It like depends on the size of cast. It depends on the budget.
Yeah.
I mean, Bleak Moments, first of all, Bleak Moments had been a 75-minute play at the Open Space Theatre in Tottenham Court Road, which long since ceased to exist, which was run by a mad American called Charles Marowitz, who also has ceased to exist. And we decided to open it out and make it into a movie. I can't remember how long the rehearsal period was. It certainly wasn't 6 months. The sequence that I've just described, for which I've just described the rehearsal improvisation for Vera Drake, was a couple of months before we started shooting the whole movie. But in the case of Secrets and Lies, we had shot 4/5 of the film, approximately, didn't know how it was going to end or how it was going to resolve itself. And so we did what we often do, stand the crew down for a stretch of time, I think about 10 days or something. We started with another famous 10-hour improvisation in which they came around to the house, they had the barbecue, all that went on in the location, in character, in costume, etc., which was a very complex event. And again, like the Vera Drake, when my job was to sit quietly and shut up and listen and learn and think, great, no, yes, no, yeah, and then to take it all and through rigor. We haven't talked about this. This is the most important thing. Rehearsing, scripting through rehearsal. So I don't ever go away, by the way, and unless anyone thinks I do, and write a script and bring it back and give it out to the actors. We arrive at the script, start by improvising, then stop, break it down, do it again. Let's change that. Let's fix that. Let's rehearse that. Now let's move on to the next bit. Let's take that bit and put it here, and let's gradually. And I can only construct a piece of action by seeing it, by being there physically with the actors in the location. I can't do it theoretically. It's an organic, integrated thing. So action and words and emotions and everything are all complete, and props and everything else are integrated in an organic way. And this is always done without any crew there, by the way. And in the case of Secrets and Lies, we arrived at the at that whole sequence at the end, which resolves where the truth comes out by that means. And I mean, classically, when we do this, there are always certain things that happen that aren't what wind up in the film because they don't help the narrative. In the case of the famous improvisation for Vera Drake that I've described to you, Danny May's character, the son, just left. He buggered off. And the same thing happened with the improvisation for Secrets and Lies. Claire Rushbrook's character, the white daughter, got hold of her boyfriend and said, "We're off, we're going." And she left the house and they went off. And in fact, when we finally stopped the improvisation, it took us hours to find them because they buggered off somewhere. And it was absolutely essential that, particularly in the case of the Secrets and Lies case, that Roxanne, the character, did not leave, that she came back. And I said to Claire Rushbrook, and this is quite an important illustration of the discipline, the principle of how I work. I would never say to an actor, "Fuck off, do this." I mean, it's got to work for the actor, the integrity of the character. And I said to Claire Rushbrook, is there any way she'd go back? She said, "No way, there's no way she'd go back." I mean, she's disgusted by the whole thing, by the lies and everything else, and she will not go back. I said, "Well, okay, fair dues. How is she going to get home?" She said, "She'll get the bus." Across the road from the house, just as you see in the film, was an actual bus stop. So we set up a separate little improvisation, sitting at the bus stop with a boyfriend. Morris, Spall's character, comes out, says, "Really great if you came." "I'm not going back. No way would she go." And then we carried on, and eventually we hit on the thing that it's the boyfriend, who up to now has been rather a was really. If he says, "You know what, I think maybe you should go back," she might then think about it. And so in other words, it's about making sure the motivation is always truthful. We've got to go back in, and then we opened up through more improvisations, and then you've got the resolution of the whole thing.
Interesting.
So there are always things that are, and some there are, I mean, look at the driving lesson scenes in Happy Go Lucky. I mean, it all came out of improvisation, all of it. But in the first place, you start with two very solid characters. And then you explore. And we couldn't do that sitting in a room with chairs. I mean, we actually had to get a car with a whole regalia for a fake driving school and all that. And I would, they do these improvisations. I'd lie on the back seat, suffering two agonies. One, we rehearsed it. The car drove round around in the Tufnell Park area where our rehearsal base was in North London, and there were lots of traffic bumps, things, and the suspension on a Ford Fiesta is not conducive to lying on the back seat. And I had to try not to corpse all the time because it was so funny. But everything that happened in those driving lessons, in the first place, came out of very, very unpredictable. You've got this fascist, this paranoid, not very intelligent conspiracy theorist, and this incredibly intelligent, positive, full of beans
forces
teacher.
Just clashing against each other.
Well, I mean, you put them together and you think, "Oh, what's going to happen?" And the joy of it was seeing what would happen, and I was able to distill from what did happen what you have in the film.
So there's no 3-act structure thing that you stick to.
Well, here's the thing about 3-act structure. There is, because this is the thing, and I'm talking to American students and things. They say, "What about the 3-act structure?" You can't. A 3-act structure is a fact of life.
Yeah.
You can't help having a 3-act structure. What happens in any story, you establish the premise, then you challenge the premise, and then you resolve it. That's a 3-act structure. So yeah, there is a 3-act structure.
Yeah, I've heard even films that have a non-linear narrative, it does just naturally fall into that anyway, regardless of what order the
I don't think about these things. I just think about what, I mean, if you look, apart from anything else, if you're an artist of any kind, you've got a sense. If you make movies or put on plays or whatever, you by definition have it in your DNA, in your bones, to be a storyteller, to have a capacity to entertain the audience. That's what it's about. So.
Just the last couple of questions is, what was the biggest challenge when you first started out as a director compared to the ones that you're facing now, or are they the same?
Well, no, they're not. Well, I mean, it's not the same because, I mean, obviously what I do and what I've always done from an early stage is to challenge the status quo. Well, I've established that people know that's what it's about. So, I haven't got that back. I mean, it's to be honest, I have nothing particularly clairvoyant to say about that because, you start young and early, and I've been, in a way, challenging the status quo from the word go in this sense. So I don't know, I can't really answer the question interestingly. And I've just proved that by the boring thing I've just said.
No, not at all.
I wanted to ask you a hypothetical, Mike. You've always been very clear that you've made the movies you want to make, and you have done. You've always been very proud of that. And I want to ask a hypothetical of, if you were given an unlimited budget and final cut on the project, you had no interference from the studio, is there any adaptation or film that you would want to work on or have your hand at?
I don't really understand.
So
you mean
if you were to?
So what the various things that would be on offer?
James Bond.
What would be different from what I've had so far?
Well,
the unlimited budget.
Yeah, so you had an unlimited budget
and no interference.
There are lots of things. There are things I would like to do or to have done, although I still have hopes, which simply would be on a much bigger scale, which I've been unable to do because of the limited sizes of budgets. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But is there something that you would?
No, I don't really talk about subject matter until I've done it.
Sure. Okay. That's fair.
Interesting. Very finally, we always ask our guests the same question: is
what film have I not seen?
Yeah.
That you're ashamed you haven't seen.
Well, I doubt you're ashamed that you haven't seen it. I doubt you have much shame with that kind of thing.
Because I've cheated by watching another one of these. Oh. I therefore knew the question.
One viewer.
Yes. So if you haven't got an answer, Mike, we're very disappointed.
Well, I haven't, because I can't. I mean, I've watched so many films. I can't. I thought there must.
Is there like a classic one, maybe?
They're doing a retrospective of my films at the BFI South Bank towards the end of the year. Going to show everything. And they asked me to suggest half a dozen films, not by me, that are important to me. So I've suggested some. And one of them is Tokyo Story by Ozu, great Japanese filmmaker. When I was making the list, I thought, hang on a minute, I know quite a lot of Ozu's films, but I'm putting down Tokyo Story, which is kind of a cliche.
Yeah, this is well-known one, yeah.
Great Ozu film. And I thought, and then I suddenly realized I've got a couple of Criterion box sets of Ozu, and I hadn't watched quite a lot of them. So I sort of sat down and spent 2 days watching Ozu films, which is fantastic. So in a way, the convoluted answer to your question is there are films that you kind of assume you've seen, like all of Ozu, which is rubbish because I haven't seen all of Ozu at all. And if there's going to be any guilt involved, it's the self-delusion that you've seen things that you haven't actually seen.
Just broken Mike Lee's heart here today. You just realised.
Well, you mentioned very quickly that you had to come up with a short list of films that you would recommend. Is there a film that you would recommend that our viewers watch or that we go out and watch?
Yes, I mean, it's very random because there are a zillion films that I would recommend. But I'll tell you what, a film that I think is so absolutely such a work of genius that I would recommend it to anybody. And it's that film, which is called The Tree of Wooden Clogs by Ermanno Olmi, which was made, I think, in 1978. And it's set in the countryside in Lombardy at the beginning of the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century. And it's about country folk, and the fantastic, extraordinary thing about the movie is that there's not a professional actor in it. It's acted entirely by real people, but It's totally a period film. Olney not only writes it, directs it, photographs it, he's the cameraman, and edits it. And it's an amazingly moving, extraordinary film, moving through the seasons. And so I would recommend that to anybody as a sort of masterpiece of movie making.
I read also you're a big fan of The 400 Blows and Bicycle Thieves as well.
I am indeed.
Yeah, great film. Because they changed the name of that, didn't they, to The Bicycle Thief, I think, because in America they clicked around with it and what have you.
I don't think we should worry about that.
So when I hear it, when people say that, I'm like, I don't think it's actually called that. I don't think it's called that.
Anyway, Mike, you've been fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you.